Today we're going to be talking about structural family therapy. Structural family therapy focuses on the family's structure, as you might imagine, since that's the title. The major premise of structural family therapy is that in individual symptoms, you can understand the symptoms of an individual, the issues that are presenting, can best understand those presenting concerns as rooted in the context of the family member's transactional patterns. Those transactional patterns and dynamics hold the system in a process that doesn't work effectively for the system, and it manifests as individual issues. By changing the family structure, you can alleviate some of those concerns, and that change in the family structure shifts those family transactional patterns and leads to the wholeness and wellness of the system. Structural theorists emphasize the wholeness of the family system, that system as a group. We're not working with one individual situation. Even if the presenting concern is related to a specific individual, the identified patient or identified client, then we work on changing the system structure. We also emphasize as structural therapist, the influence of the family's hierarchy. How is the family hierarchy configured? And are parents in a place of power? Do they have appropriate power? Is there closeness within the family? And the subsystems, how are those subsystems interdependent and related? And how effective is the functioning of the different subsystem relationships? The primary role of the counselor or therapist in structural family therapy is to serve as an instrument of change. You have to be active. A structural family counselor joins the family, but as a distant relative, not someone right in that immediate system. The counselor is actively engaged with the family as a whole. You will not see a structural family therapist just sitting back asking question after question after question with a passive response to engagement with the family. It will be a therapist who is engaged, who is moving people, who is suggesting things, who is helping to coach one family member through an interaction with another, who's observing, but then after the observation makes some shifts in how family dynamics, ask for role plays and connections, shift positions in the therapeutic interaction. The therapist is very engaged. The therapist introduces challenges, and by introducing a challenge, you can prompt change in the structure and the patterns of the family dynamics. The leading figures, you will have covered these leading figures in your text reading, so we're not going to go through all of these, but you can read more that is written by each of these figures or about each of these figures to better understand structural family therapy. And in this class, one of the things that will help you will be to pursue more information about the theorist and the therapist, because then you can see the real side of it. What are the connections? Like in that Minuchin's video that's part of this module, you hear Minuchin talking about his family of origin relationships and how that's influenced his thinking about family therapy. That's important for you to consider as you reflect on your own thinking about family therapy. Therapeutic efforts of structural family therapy focus on changing the structure of the relationships. You help the family develop clearer boundaries that are appropriate boundaries and help the family learn to negotiate for the desired changes. It's not just a do this or do that. It's that negotiation across subsystems and family members. The other thing is that structural family therapy focuses on helping the family deal more directly with hidden or underlying conflicts. In essence, the structural approach to families is based on the concept that a family is more than the individual biopsychodynamics of its members. Family members relate according to certain arrangements, and those arrangements and relationships, they govern those transactions. And within our transactions, we can see what's working for the family and what is not when we observe those transactions. As a structural family therapist, you're going to try to create opportunities for engagement across family members and subsystems in session so you can observe those transactional patterns and what works and what doesn't. And the arrangements, though they're not often explicitly stated, and family members often do not even recognize those transactional relationships and arrangements and subsystems, they form the structure of the family. And the reality of that structure is of a different order from the reality of the individual members. By understanding the structure, you can understand what's working for the family as a full system and for the individual members. The family structure is the internal organization of the family. This dictates how, when, and whom individual members relate to within the family and across relationships. The subsequent transactional patterns make up that structure of the family. So who holds the power in the family? And how are the relationships structured? Are they positive, warm, and close? Across every member, across some members? As we know, if you reflect on families, there are different types of relationships between each member and then like across subsystems? So are the siblings, how do the siblings as a subsystem relate to the parents? And then how does each sibling relate to each parent? And are there conflictual relationships there? Have some of the relationships been broken? Is there a divorce or separation that has broken those? And what do we know about the family from understanding that structure? The structure represents the sum of the operational rules that the family has evolved and developed over time for carrying out all of its important functions. That's good and bad, right? So some of those structures you'll see in place are important to the family because they maintain an equilibrium. They let the family stay with what they know, but they disenfranchise one member or they isolate one member. We see this with a parent who's enmeshed with a child or with the children, and they have this really close enmeshed relationship, and it serves a function for the family because it gives the child a sense of warmth and stability. It gives the parent a partner in a sense from those children to get some satisfaction of the closeness. But by alienating and isolating the other parent, that person is separated from the family, and those relationships with that parent and child are impacted, and the spousal subsystem or partner subsystem at the top that we would see at the top of the hierarchy typically is negatively impacted as well. But it maintains something for the family. So when you look at structural patterns, you have to say, what is this maintaining for the family? And what do we know about the family because of that structure, right? And if it's not working in all, it's serving a purpose, but it's not a positive purpose, how can we unbalance that structure so that then we can rebalance in a way that's positive and contributes to the family's wellness? In family structure, we know that there's an invisible network of demands and expectations that regulate the family. This includes rules, family rules, understood, implicit, and explicit. You know, the ones that we say that are the family's rules. Boundaries, what are the boundaries? You know, how do those boundaries separate subsystems and provide appropriate structure or appropriate connection? What are the ways of relating? What's the hierarchy? And who holds the power in the family? And does that shift in different situations? The central constructs of structural family therapy, one is the subsystem or subsystems. These exist to carry out various family tasks necessary for the overall function of the system. Each family member may belong to several subsystems. You may be a part of a sibling subsystem, part of the parent-child subsystem, different ones. And each person may have differing levels of power within different subsystems. So in the parent-child relationship in that subsystem, you as the oldest child may hold less power, right? But then in the sibling subsystem, as the oldest child, you hold more power. It changes. They're defined by interpersonal boundaries and rules for membership, and examples include the spousal subsystem, parental subsystem, sibling subsystem, and so on. Other central constructs include boundaries. So what are boundaries? Boundaries, do we see them? No, but when we map them on a structural map, you get to. But anyway, boundaries. They vary in their levels of permeability or flexibility. Clearly defined boundaries help to maintain separateness between subsystems, for better or for worse. Again, some of these things are what they are, but as they are applied in a particular family, they may work or not work, right? Dysfunctional boundaries, rigid or inflexible boundaries that impede connections, this is termed disengagement. And so when those rigid boundaries are in place and one family member is not included or certain subsystems are not included, the sibling subsystem is so tight that the parents can't break in, it's very rigid, that impedes connections and it's disengaged, right? Diffuse boundaries are chaotic and enmeshed. You know, you have a parent and a child who are so tightly intertwined that you can't, there's no boundary between the parent and the children in a way that allows for the child to develop independently of the parent, even related interdependently, you know. This provides minimal privacy, maximum interaction. You see lines of authority and responsibility are not clearly drawn, and this is typically termed, the appropriate term there would be enmeshment. Central constructs continued would include alignments. So we've discussed boundaries, we've discussed subsystems, and alignments. Alignments are the ways that different family members join together or oppose one another in carrying out a family activity. The emotional and psychological connections that families make with one another, those are also alignments, okay? Dysfunctional alignments are like triangulation, where each parent, demands that a child form a relationship with that parent against the other parent. Like we are allies and that parent's out. That's like triangulation. Or coalitions or alliances between specific family members against a third member. So it could be multiple family members together and a family member out. Your triangulation is 1, 2, and the third point's out, okay? Another central construct is power. Who holds the authority? Who's the decision maker? Who holds responsibility? Who carries out the decisions? You know, and what's the relative influence of each family member on any operation within the family's outcome? Okay. The therapeutic goals are to actively and directly challenge the family's patterns of interactions. Like what you do is you have to get the family engaged with each other in a structural family therapy session. You get the family engaged, you try to observe those central constructs. What are the boundaries? What are you learning about boundaries, alignments, who's holding the power? You map it out structurally and consider it for yourself, and then you decide how would you best change the structure of this family to positively impact their wellness, you know, to connect them better and to go to a more positive pattern of interaction, right? The other piece of this is that you have to encourage all the family members to look beyond the symptoms of whoever is your identified patient or client in order to view all of their behaviors within the context of that family structure. That's that piece that we've talked about before, that piece of shifting from an intrapsychic or individual approach and perspective to a systemic approach. And you have to help as a counselor. You're working to help the family change their interactive patterns and to redefine relationships. What does your process look like? Your process is a process of, it begins with joining and accommodating. You join like a distant relative, and you accommodate, you shift to match the family style of interaction. Mimesis is when you are joined so tightly that your affect, your language, your tone, all of these mirror the families and indicate that you're part of that system, right? Then the therapist assesses family interactions, formally and informally. We do a lot of formal assessment in structural family therapy and a lot of informal. Family mapping. Family mapping allows you to define the clarity of boundaries, provide a clear picture of boundaries, alliances, all those central constructs we looked at before. The therapeutic process also includes monitoring dysfunctional sets. So like what's not working? You know, boundary making, unbalancing, tracking, enactment. You do all of these pieces. You see the things that are not working, and then you apply the boundary making. You apply some unbalancing. You are tracking through the information, and you're enacting. You're engaged in these enactments. You're staging it's a staged effort. What an enactment is, a staged effort by the therapist to bring an outside family conflict into a family session. Okay, that's an enactment. And the therapeutic process also includes that restructuring of transactional patterns. You reframe things, help to reframe the meaning of the original event. You look at the overlaps and impacts and like how do all of these pieces relate to the other therapeutic processes we've had in place. But that restructuring also is a physical restructuring. It's telling a parent, when you begin to see the pattern emerging and the structure emerging, you say to one person, all right, I'm going to ask you today to sit over here instead of beside this person. Or maybe if you have a situation where the children are holding a lot more power in the family than the parents, or an inappropriate amount of power, then you ask the parents to sit together and the children to sit across, right? Like you physically restructure the family. What do we know about healthy families in structural family therapy? Like structural family therapy, what's the view of a healthy family? There's good organization. Parents hold more power and authority than children. Older children have more responsibilities and privileges than younger siblings. There's appropriate reciprocity to each other and appropriate power in the family. There's a complementarity of functions. People work together. They operate as a team. They accept their interdependency and that we all rely on each other, but we work together. The subsystems operate in an integrated way, and this protects the integrity of the family system. It does not threaten it. You don't have a subsystem that leads to an unbalancing of the power and the appropriate power in the family. Have some clearly defined generational boundaries, and then alignments between the parents, the ones in charge, the authority figures in the family. There's alignment there. And there are rules that are appropriate, that are related to power and authority and how families work together as teams. There's positive communication, and there's the sense that we are hopeful and connected with each other in good times and in bad, right? That hope can sometimes be hard to hold on to. But with that's structural family therapy. Remember that structure, the structural piece is your focus. You're going to get to do some work in this module with some structural mapping, and it's a great way to get a sense of how those central constructs manifest in a family. Thank you.